It being the allotted time, we'll open the hearing, and as soon as Deb is ready and gives me the high sign, we'll start grilling energy. All right. If you guys need more chairs up there, feel free. Okay. Good morning.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the
That's
opportunity.
true.
Good
I still
afternoon.
wish it was morning, I guess.
Yeah. Good morning, afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Department of Energy's operating budget for fiscal years 24 and 25. My name is Jared Chicoine, and I'm the Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Energy. Joining me today is our Business Director, Lenny Radio. Also behind me, we have David Shulock, our General Counsel, Josh Elliott, the Director of our Policy and Program Division, and Roy Patterson, Director of our Division of Administration. The New Hampshire Department of Energy is New Hampshire's newest state agency and was created in the last budget. Our statute states that the department is to, quote, improve the administration of state government by providing unified direction on policies, programs, and personnel in the field of energy and utilities, making possible increased efficiency and economies from integrated administration and operation of the various energy and utility-related functions of the state government. Part of the intent of the legislation was to allow the PUC to focus on their regulatory adjudicative responsibilities and to make clear the separation between the state's regulatory advocacy role and the impartial role that the PUC plays. The Department of Energy has a large and diverse set of responsibilities. The creation of the department involved the reorganization of the Public Utilities Commission and the dissolution of the Office of Strategic Initiatives. We are joined by our colleagues from the administratively attached agencies, the Public Utilities Commission, the Office of Consumer Advocate, and the Site Evaluation Committee. These agencies are independent. We don't direct them in what they do, other than we do supply them with various back office budgetary and administrative assistance. And you'll hear from them following our presentation. The Department of Energy fills a wide variety of roles in the field of energy. This diversity of responsibilities is reflected in our mission statement, which says the prosperity and security of New Hampshire and its citizens require an affordable, innovative, reliable, and sustainable energy economy. The Department of Energy is committed to achieving that goal and will provide a unified direction of energy policies, reasonable and practical programs, principled regulation, and skilled representation in energy-related proceedings of New Hampshire's public interest. The Department of Energy will serve the people of New Hampshire in an honest, transparent, and effective manner. So let me just take a moment to talk about some of those responsibilities. The Department of Energy is an automatic party at proceedings before the PUC, where we fill a record-building and advocacy role. This is where we get into the setting of the rates that our electric, natural gas, and water customers pay. Unlike many other of the regulatory activities in state government, we're not regulating individuals and small businesses. We are regulating large, government-guaranteed natural monopolies. The effects of our regulation involve direct financial impacts on what every citizen pays for necessary services. The PUC is the adjudicative body that makes decisions in the rate proceedings, and the DOE and the OCA work hard in these proceedings to build the record and advocate in the interests of New Hampshire. We administer assistance programs and other related programs, mostly that use federal funds. You can see many of the programs that we administer on the handout that we provided to the committee. We also provide support to consumers in dealing with utility companies and taking consumer complaints against utilities. Last time I checked, we average around 6,000 contacts from consumers annually. We have also been given a strong policy role, which includes the creation of the 10-year state energy strategy and providing technical and policy advice to the legislature. We also play a major role in regional discussions, collaborations, and negotiations with other states in our region. As all of New England is part of the same electric grid, the decisions of other states can affect New Hampshire. The Department of Energy is statutorily obligated to defend New Hampshire's interests from the shifting of costs that result from other states' policy positions. I just want to go over some of our budget priorities. In putting together our budget proposal, our primary goal has been to take advantage of the creation of the Department of Energy to find operational efficiencies and manage through significant challenges in the energy field. Our budget represents $67.5 million in FY24 and $67.9 million in FY25. As a part of our effort to find efficiencies, we have proposed a budget that decreases 1.4% in FY24 and about 1% in FY25 as compared to FY23 adjusted authorized. This is due in large part to the abolishment of 7 positions in this budget. Our budget is about 87% federal and other funds. Other includes RGGI funds and renewable energy funds. About 12 to 13% utility assessment, and 0.6% general funds as well. About 80% of our funds are a pass-through, are pass-through grants that represent either assistance programs or ratepayer rebates. Our team is comprised of many very technical, highly skilled, and in-demand workers: lawyers, economists, analysts, auditors, engineers, and many others. Energy is a complex and niche field, with many opportunities in the private sector that pay substantially more than the state. Our team members are here truly as public servants. They are people who want to be here and serve the ratepayers and consumers of New Hampshire. I'm very proud of our team and how they've responded to significant challenges over the last few years. I also want to take a moment just to talk about the items that were included in HP2 for our agency. I'll just run through those quickly. We requested language to put the general counsel position back into the budget. In the previous budget discussion, the language was inadvertently dropped from the statute. The position is already budgeted and existing at the department, but the position is currently that individual serving as an at-will employee. This bill cleans up and clarifies the position, so we actually have that at the department. We requested some technical adjustment to our utility assessment statute that allow for more efficient administration of the assessment. This includes removing a requirement that the assessment be sent by certified mail, a shift from fiscal calendar year to better align with reportable revenue, and some date changes. It also includes language that was inadvertently excluded when the department was created to collect additional assessment with the approval of fiscal committee and governor and council. The language applies to the PUC and should also apply to the department. The Renewable Energy Fund supports renewable energy initiatives administered by the Department of Energy. We requested language that allowed us to charge to the fund for the administration of our Office of Offshore Wind Industry and Development. That office was funded in the previous budget, but the only appropriate funds that we were able to charge were federal state energy program funds. The Renewable Energy Fund better aligns with the purpose of that office and would free up federal funds to be used for state government energy efficiency projects that save further general funds. The general funds are required as a match to federal grant funding. Finally, we requested the establishment of a regional energy advocacy fund. As I mentioned earlier, the department has an obligation to represent New Hampshire's interests at the regional and federal level. In addition, the department must advocate against proposed rules or policies that are inconsistent with the policies, rules, or laws of New Hampshire. Adequate representation is needed to meaningfully participate in federal and regional proceedings. This fund will allow the department to obtain legal representation and technical expertise during the development of rules and regulations of the wholesale electricity markets, among other things, that will achieve New Hampshire's policy goals and fulfill its statutory mandate. Unfortunately, we do not really have an adequate revenue stream to charge for those types of activities that we would need, so we requested general funds to be placed into this fund. In conclusion, I'd just like to reiterate how proud I am of our team as they have navigated the last few years. We're a lean group, and everyone is working hard to best serve the people of New Hampshire. Thank you for this time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Questions from committee members? Senator Bradley.
Thank you very much. So the Regional Advocacy Fund, that cannot be funded out of the utility assessment?
Thank you for the question. It was determined that it would be most appropriate if it were a general fund appropriation, that we couldn't actually directly assess the utilities for that work.
Follow up?
Certainly.
The energy assistance program that we passed last year, I think it was or $44 million.
Yes, 42 million.
It's only been used to a limited extent. What is the bottom line that you think at this point will lapse back to the general fund?
Just one second, I'm gonna look to Lenny here. I think we have some notes on that.
We'll know, Senator, thank you for the question. We'll know a little bit more come April 30th when the program actually stops taking in applications. And right now, we project about $2 million to be spent with the fuel assistance, and around $1 million with the electric assistance. But that's only based on current spending, not on any new applications or ones that are currently being processed right now by the CAPS. So a conservative number, is that right if I?
Sure.
Conservatively, we feel a 15 million lapse on the.
How much?
15 million.
On the fuel side,
And 5 million on the electric side.
and that's just being very conservative. The program closes in 2 weeks, and by the
But so far, you've only spent $3 million?
yeah, roughly, yes. So I mean, that's again just being very conservative.
So it could be
It
as high as 35, 36
could,
million.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bradley. Senator D'Alessandro, I saw you move your mic
Yeah,
first.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your presentation. How much money did you move through the caps for fuel assistance?
So in this program year, I'll look to Lenny. We typically were awarded. It's between roughly 24 million and 28 million annually, and there's always some carryover of several $1 million. Although this year, Senator, we are going to probably be up around 5,000 households compared to last year. So considerably higher number of households qualified and were certified. So I expect less carryover than in prior years, but I don't have an exact number for you, but I can get that for you.
And did you, further question, did you use all of the caps?
Yes, Senator, we do. All 5 CAPS, we contract with all 5 community action agencies.
And further question, and did they handle the electric portion also, the system benefit money?
They do. So they also administer the electric assistance program. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few questions. Following up on Senator Bradley's question about the lapse, is this lapse money that's already covered on the surplus statement, or is this new lapse money?
I'll have Lenny answer that question.
I do not believe this would be covered under the surplus statement, since we haven't given any lapse number up until this very moment that we just gave those numbers. Unless Admin Services has done any calculations on the emergency bill, and that's the only general funds that we currently have. So I don't think they're part of the surplus statement.
Mike Hoffman was shaking his head over there. Thank you.
No, this would not be part of what's on the surplus.
So this is a new lapse.
The additional.
Thank you.
Exciting.
Anything else?
Yes,
Senator?
please. So I was looking back at the history of this $42 million program, and I know we suspended all of the rules in both chambers. There was no public hearing. Did your department have a chance to collaborate with legislative leadership on the design of the program?
We did. We absolutely had that opportunity. We shared concerns that we had, suggestions for how we felt it might be best to stand up a program like this on such short notice. So we did have those opportunities.
And we just didn't listen, or?
Senator, I'll be careful how I answer that. I think legislators did
No one
listen.
ever talks to me about energy, let me just say.
Okay.
Except Griffin Roberge.
Okay. So, originally, the governor had proposed a one-time electric bill credit for every residential electric customer. That would have been a quick and efficient way to get support to folks, but there were concerns about, customers who didn't need the assistance receiving that credit. So the legislature made the changes that they did. I'll just say that I'm very proud of the work our team did. The legislature, as you know, passed that bill in the middle of September. We had the contracts with the caps in place by the first week of October. We did everything we could to quickly stand up that program. And we would have liked to have seen more uptake, but that just didn't materialize. But the caps also did an exceptional job of trying to work with us on a short, compressed time frame. So.
Thank you. One further question.
Yes, ma'am.
On page 434 of the compare bill, the Renewable Energy Fund, I see that we're appropriating $2 million a year. Just wondering how much money is actually in that fund?
And I'm going to look to Lenny for that.
I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but I believe it's around 7 million.
7 million. So we'll follow up. Why are we not appropriating more of it?
So I'll have Josh Elliott just come up for just a moment as I work through this. I'll make sure I'm accurate.
Just sit at the end of that, so you'll have, we
Welcome
won't have to
back.
move everybody around.
You're double smart, Josh.
Yeah.
It's always good to be back in Senate Finance. Griffin wanted me to make a joke asking you questions about Energy Center, so I thought I'd pass that along.
Thank you.
So to answer your question, we've seen revenues in the Renewable Energy Fund, which are funded through alternative compliance payments, so essentially electric distribution utilities and competitive suppliers who, if they don't buy enough renewable energy certificates, which are the renewable attributes of electricity, they basically make a payment into this fund in lieu of acquiring those RECs. We've seen we don't really have a good sense until very late in the game as to how much is going to come in every year. So we have traditionally budgeted small amounts and then gone up a little bit more. For example, last year we did, this current year we've done $3 million in appropriations out. But we've seen fluctuations in the amount of money that comes in. Either it's very, very high, sometimes it'll be very high, sometimes it'll be very low. This is to ensure that there is consistency, having a little bit of reserve in case there's a very low year, of which the programs can still operate without having sort of a feast and famine cycle.
Just final follow-up, if I could. Do you come in through fiscal then to go from 2 million to 3 million?
I'll answer that one, Senator. It's a continually appropriated non-lapsing fund, so we do a memo to Bureau of Accounts at DAS to appropriate the remaining funds that we need.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And PUC is next. Are we ready, Deb?
Good afternoon, Chairman, Senators. I'm Dan Goldner, PUC Chairman. And I'll here to talk about the operating budget today. The Public Utilities Commission is vested with general jurisdiction over electric, natural gas, water, and sewer utilities as defined by 362.2. For issues such as rates, quality of service, finance, accounting, and safety, and with limited jurisdiction over telecommunications as defined by 362.6 and 7, or I'm sorry, 7 and 8, 363.22, and 365.1. It is the PUC's mission to ensure that customers of regulated utilities receive safe, adequate, and reliable service at just and reasonable rates. The Commission, like all other state agencies, is governed by RSA 91A, the state's right to know law. In conformance with those requirements, we endeavor to conduct our proceedings in a fair and transparent manner, making every effort to make both observation and participation by the public as easy and efficient as possible. Those efforts include our interactive website as well as access to hearings. Thank you, and I'll take any questions. Maybe the only thing I'll point out in the budget is that for fiscal year '24, the proposed budget is 3.1 million, and for fiscal year '25, 3.2 million. And we are at the PUC, as Commissioner Chacoine pointed out, a much smaller staff than the former PUC, with currently 16 individuals planned for both '24 and '25. Thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Questions from the committee members? Seeing none, I think you're good. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
sir.
Site Evaluation Committee.
Thank you for having me. I am Drew Beamer. I am Administrator of the Site Evaluation Committee. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present my fiscal year 2024 and 2025 operating budget for the SEC. The mission of the SEC is the review, approval, monitoring, and enforcement of compliance in the planning, siting, construction, and operation of energy facilities in the state. Ideally, our budget is funded through fees paid during the permitting of new energy facilities. This mechanism, however, can prove unreliable as it is tied to the number, size, and scope of applicants. Currently, there are none. Accordingly, additional funds is often needed to supplement the enforcement and adjudication component of the committee's purview. With that, I'll take questions.
Questions from committee members? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Office of Consumer Advocate.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gray, President Bradley, honorable members of the committee. My name is Donald Crease, and since early 2016, I've had the honor of serving as New Hampshire's Consumer Advocate. The Office of the Consumer Advocate by statute represents the interests of residential utility customers before the Public Utilities Commission and anywhere else on the planet where the interests of residential utility customers from New Hampshire are at issue. We are one of about 45 similar ratepayer advocacy organizations or state agencies around the country. So most states have such an organization or state agency. And our job essentially is to put some weight on the ratepayer side of the scale so that the PUC commissioners and other deciders get a balanced view and thereby make better decisions about what to do about utilities, their rates, and their terms of service. In addition to participating at PUC proceedings, we also participate regionally in matters that are pending either before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission or ISO New England, the regional grid operator, or NEPOOL, the so-called Stakeholder Advisory Board to NEPOOL. And largely for the same reason that Willie Sutton robbed banks, it's very important for us to participate at that regional level. That is where a great many of the electricity-related decisions are being made these days. I'm very proud of the fact that of all the people who have held my job over the years, I'm the only one who can claim to have been nominated by a governor from each of the two major political parties. I was originally nominated by Governor Hassan, and I was renominated 4 years ago by Governor Sununu, and I am hoping that Governor Sununu does the same thing again this year because my term expires in November. We are the smallest ratepayer advocacy office in New England. We have 5 FTEs authorized. When we're fully staffed, it's me, my staff attorney, who's here in the room, our legal assistant, and 2 analysts. My 2 analyst jobs are currently and chronically vacant, and that is an issue I've attempted to address in the proposed budget, as I'll explain in a moment. Focusing on the differences between our current budget, meaning what we actually spent in fiscal 22, what we're currently spending in fiscal 23, what we're asking to spend in fiscal 24 and 25. I did ask the governor, and I think I successfully persuaded the House to add a new position to our staff. It's the first time I've asked to do that, and I have made that request because I would like to devote a human being full-time to the regional issues and matters that I was talking about earlier. I'm the only ratepayer advocate in the region that currently doesn't have a dedicated staff person. I'm presently entirely reliant on consultants to do that kind of work for me, and I just find that that is not adequate for me to discharge my statutory obligation right in my enabling statute to advance the public policy of my state and to make sure that nothing that my ratepayers in New Hampshire are forced to do is subsidizing the public policy of other states. The only other significant difference between our current budget and the budget that we're seeking for fiscal 24 and 25 is an increase in the amount of money that we're authorized to spend on outside consultants. It appears in the litigation line of our budget. The word litigation confused people over on the House side because people were worried that we're actually engaged in litigation in court. What we're really talking about is administrative litigation before the PUC. And because my two analyst jobs are chronically vacant, and because those analysts are normally the people I would turn to primarily to present expert testimony to the PUC, I'm looking to present that kind of expert testimony via consultants rather than staff. And as you probably know, I'm not allowed to just move money from my personnel budget into my litigation budget. And so basically, I've added to my litigation budget for that purpose. I think that's everything I want to affirmatively say to the committee today. Of course, I'd be happy to answer any and all of the questions that the chairman is willing to entertain.
Questions from committee members? Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you very much for coming in. Congratulations on the great job that you've done over the years.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I love the bow tie.
Ah, well.
You know, it's classic. It's a classic.
Thank you.
They upped your litigation by $100,000. So you went from 150 to 250 in both years.
And again, that is because I need to hire outside consultants to present expert testimony at the PUC.
And is that adequate?
Well, just by way of comparison, my counterpart in Maine, the public advocate, has a staff that's twice the size of mine and a budget that's 3 times the size of mine. And I'm sure that he is capable of using all those resources adequately. There's always more work to be done, Senator D'Alessandro, and so it's always a judgment call about how much resources you want to assign to the OCA. We are entirely funded by ratepayers, so we're very conscious all the time of how we spend our money. And so while I would love to have 3 times the resources I currently do, I've gone as far as I think I prudently can in terms of what I'm asking you to authorize me to do.
Further question?
Yes, sir.
The additional person you're looking for, is your ability to get that person, is that person available, quality person available for the salary that you're offering?
That's a very good question. And the honest answer is I don't know. I structured that position deliberately so it would be an attorney position. I typically have better luck recruiting attorneys than I do analysts from other learned professions. I think an attorney would be able to do an excellent job in this regional work. Again, looking at what my counterparts in the rest of the region are doing. It will be a challenge filling the position, though, and I will do my best. I'm very persuasive with my fellow lawyers because there's no more legal, there's no other job available anywhere in New Hampshire for a lawyer that would wear a more brightly white hat than the job that I will be able to recruit for should this go forward.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. If you get this position, would you be able to reduce your consulting expenses?
Yes.
And is that reflected in the budget? Sorry, Paul. Is that reflected already in the budget?
It is not. I'm basically hedging my budgetary bet in that respect.
Could I just ask him
Yes, ma'am.
how much you might be able to reduce which line?
That is a difficult thing to guesstimate
You
because
can get back to us.
I'd be happy to. Again, relating back to the answer I gave to Senator D'Alessandro, there's always more work for us to do than we are actually able to do, and that's definitely true at the regional level. I would love to spend an hour or two with the committee sometime talking to you about regional electric matters and how important they are and how overmatched we are when we're talking to representatives of the legacy generation and transmission owners.
For you and any of the other departments out there, if you have follow-up information, please get it to Deb and she will get it to the whole committee. Any other questions from the committee members?
Just one.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you. I know this isn't your purview, but I look at my electric bill every month, and I look at the cost of energy versus the cost of transmission. And I notice on many months, there's a real variance between the cost of electricity and transmission. Why does that variance exist?
The cost of actual energy varies according to market conditions.
Right.
The cost of transmission doesn't vary as much, frankly, because it's so high. We pay the highest transmission rates anywhere in the country here in New England. And, again, it's an excellent example of what I was talking about earlier. The NESCO, which is the New England States Committee on Electricity, recently wrote a very eloquent letter pointing out that there are about $6 billion in so-called asset condition transmission projects that are either going on the books or currently on the books, and those things are essentially unscrutinized. That is a huge amount of money. It's a huge bill to send to the region's ratepayers without anybody looking at whether those expenditures are prudently incurred. That's the kind of additional work I would like to be able to do some of.
So it's worth looking at.
Absolutely.
I can't, if I might, I can't believe that. And I look at that electric bill every month. And unless there's dramatic work being done on the transmission side, that should be going down. That should not be escalating on a monthly basis. There's something wrong there, something categorically wrong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I didn't know if you had any additional comments based on, apparently not. Is there any other questions from other committee members? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for hearing me, and I would just like to thank Mr. Raudio sitting next to me for his excellent assistance to our office. The Department of Energy's business office does a great job providing us with our administrative support.
All right, thank you.
Indeed, and thank you for your comments about my tie. I have to remember which one I'm wearing.
Commissioner, come on down. Department of Environmental Services.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name's Bob Scott with the Department of Environmental Services. I have with me our Chief Operating Officer, Sue Carlson, who's the brains of the outfit when it comes to the budget. So I thought you would appreciate that. So, Sue is passing out a, they don't have the presentation yet. Yes, they do. Okay, so hopefully you have a PowerPoint presentation that we provided in advance. Thank you. So I'm going to not go over the first few pages. Looking at the crowd here, I think you all know what we do here for the Department of Environmental Services. So I'll start on page 5 of the handout. Obviously, I can answer questions at any point. So some of the highlights for our operating budget is we've received quite an influx of federal funds. So where our 24-25 operating budget is over $342 million, it actually doubles the amount of federal money that we're passing through. And through that, we're expanding 8 federal programs. Most of this is from the Infrastructure Act, from Congress. So the State Revolving Loan Fund for clean water, drinking water, our coastal resilience infrastructure has been increased for funding. We have a fund called Emerging Contaminants, which is not just PFAS, but PFAS is a good example. Additional funding for Superfund sites, and significant funding for lead and copper particularly lead service line pipe replacements, brownfields, and then dam safety. What you'll see as we go through this is an increase in the loans by 50%, grants 82%, and increase in contracts by 110%. We'll discuss these in the follow-up slides. Sue Carlson, as I mentioned, has put together in the following slides, I'll let her speak to it, both pie charts, kind of organizing our budget, hopefully in a useful way for you, and then some tables explaining that. And then I'll pick up some of the House Bill 2 highlights as well. So, Sue?
Thank you. For the record, my name is Susan Carlson with the Department of Environmental Services. Starting on slide number 6, what I did was give you a pie chart showing the source of funds so that you understand how this department works. As you can start from the left-hand side, our general funds are at $17.3 million, which is only 5% of our entire operating budget. Then we have our SRF federal funds. They account for 26% and currently are budgeted $88 million. Then our SRF repayment funds make up another $55 million. So between those two, the SRF accounts for 42% of our entire operating budget. All other federal programs are another $50 million, which is about 15%. Then the remaining fee accounts, which are $91 million, and that represents another 27% of our budget. And then finally, the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund, which we pulled out, is at $39.4 million or 11%. So as you can see, we have a very tiny piece of general funds, a lot of federal, and a lot of fee funds. On our next slide, number 7, I've given you the breakdown on a department level of our uses of funds. You should note that 74% of our operating budget goes out the door in the form of grants, contracts, reimbursements, and loans. Our operating expenses are at 14.5, which is only 4% of our budget. Salary and benefits for the 492 positions is at $66.1 million, which is 20%. Interagency transfers are at 2%. Now that means DOIT, building rent, Attorney General's office, those types of costs. Our oil and MTBE reimbursements are another $22.7 million or 7%. Grants make up $47.4 million, and loans, which make up 44% of our operating budget, is just a hair under $150 million. And those numbers are pretty even for fiscal year 25. Now, loans actually involves both the drinking water and the clean water state revolving loan programs. It involves the drinking water groundwater trust loans and PFAS loans. On slide 8, what I've done is given you a breakdown of how our budget looks from a divisional basis. As you can see, the Commissioner's Office at $7.8 million is only 2% of our operating budget, followed by the Air Division at 12.4%. Water Division, which is our single biggest division, the SRF portion of the Water Division is at $143.5 million, and all other programs within the Water Division are at 62.8. That accounts for approximately 60% of our entire operating budget belongs to the Water Division. You can thank Rainey for that. And then our Waste Management Division sits at 34% or $116 million. I also should note that the Water Division accounts for 53% of our staff, or 259 positions. The Waste has 113 positions. Air has 64 positions, and the Commissioner's Office has 56. On slide number 9, what I've done was break down the budget analysis by cost category. As you can see, starting with grants, we went from $26 million budget in 23 for grants to $47.4 million in 24, a change of $21 million, an 82% increase. Our loans have gone from $101 million to $149.5. That's a 48.5% increase, a $48.5 million increase, or 48%. Reimbursements for oil and MTBE are essentially flat, with only a $760,000 increase. Contracts have gone from $14 million to $30 million. That's a $16 million jump. Operating expenses went up by 1.6. Salary and benefits went up by $809,000, which is a 1% increase. And interagency transfers went up by $981,000, which is a 14% increase. Most of that is due to significant increases in building rent and DOIT. For some reason, 29 Hazen Drive is an expensive place to heat. Not enough hot air.
I have to caution you, Rennie is a classmate of mine. We went to high school together. So I feel I need to defend him.
Yeah. On contracts, I did want to point out on contracts that the biggest single increase in that line deals with our Superfund program. EPA has significantly increased their appropriations in the Superfund area, and we are looking at nearly a $7 million increase in Superfund contract work in 24, and then that is expected to double again in 25. Most of that is related to PFAS remediation in known Superfund sites. Now, you'll notice from 24 to 25, we see a $7 million decrease in loans. That is because under the current appropriation for PFAS, we have a $50 million loan pool for PFAS loans. We intend to obligate the majority of that funds in this year and next year, leaving only $7 million left to obligate in 25. If you go to slide 10, we have a budget analysis by funding. Again, you can see we've broken it down. General funds went up by 9%. Most of that can be attributed to our allocation of DOIT charges and building rent to general fund accounts. Plus, we had a $365,000 increase in our workers' comp appropriation. Ministry Services has redone the way they allocate workers' comp costs, and so that was a significant increase for us for the 24-25 biennium. As you can also see, federal funds for SRF, that increase is matched by the increase in loans, along with some increases in SRF grants. Same thing with federal funds, all other. We saw a significant increase. A good chunk of that is due to an increase in contracts for Superfund. On the next page, we're going to switch over and talk about HB2.
Thank you, Sue. So included in HB2 are this line by line here. We asked for some changes to the structure of the Commissioner's Office. We've also have asked to, on our councils, so air resources, waste management, water, wetlands councils, who hear appeals, look at our rules, and provide advice to the directors. We want to streamline that process a bit. That's here in the budget, but it also moves a position that currently serves those councils in appeals, et cetera, And we'll move that to the Attorney General's office. We have for our land resource management group in the water division, in prior bienniums, we've merged the fees. So we have wetlands, shoreland, alteration of terrain, and we want to also merge subsurface fees into the same account to allow us a little bit better flexibility as those accounts ebb and flow between themselves. For the state aid grant program, which I think you're all familiar with, so that's an after-the-fact grant program, typically for water work that's done. Currently, the law, towns can apply basically anytime they want after they finish the project. Often it's even in excess of 6 years from the time the project is done. So we were hoping to narrow the scope a little, not scope, but the time frame a little bit, so we could act a little bit more expeditiously for those grants. So this part of HB2 sets a 1-year limit to file the application for us to repay. We also have some clarifications to how our alteration of terrain permits, our fees are associated with the permits. There's been some confusion with if you ask for an amendment for an alteration of terrain permit, some feel they have to give us a fee as if the whole project that was being done, the fee has to account for it all. Our intent is all for an amendment, you're just paying a fee for that amount that's covered in the amendment. I'm sorry, I'm missing.
You're missing the 27 million.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was going to skip over. It's only 27 million. So obviously the state aid grant program itself, there's 28 million there for that, again, that after the fact repayment program for wastewater treatment facilities. For the Winnipesaukee River Basin, which is our wastewater treatment facility that we run up in Franklin and the collection systems around it. When that was originally created, there's a $3 million limit on the amount that the basin can borrow. And again, this is not general funds. This is the 10-member communities that are funding this. At least certainly in my memory, every biennium, the legislature overrides that $3 million cap. But that was set in 1986, and obviously $3 million in 1986 doesn't go as far in 2023. So we're asking for that to be removed.
Yeah, we raised it to 30.
Okay. Yeah. So and then lastly on this page, which is page 11, there's some carryover from the creation of the Department of Energy that still has our name in it. So we wanted to make sure that was cleaned up. So that was more of a cleanup thing. And then lastly, I forget, there's a line item here for $1 million that we, for the Department of Justice, received a settlement from Monsanto last biennium, and that went to the general fund. This would add $1 million to do some of the work that was envisioned out of that settlement with Monsanto for PCB contamination. The next section on page 12 talks about House bills that were subsequently moved into House Bill 2 by the House. So I'll talk about those briefly. So again, the House bill sections are listed. I can talk to them if you want. So it provides $28,000 for, $98,000. I'm glad I have Sue here in my ear. I'm going to call her Jiminy Cricket, I think. To establish, basically creates a position and requires some work to be done on food waste and composting. It also renames the PFAS Remediation Loan Fund and Response Fund, and allows us to do a broader range of work related to PFAS. It also adds, these changes also add $2 million to the Solid Waste Management Fund for, again, a little bit a special focus on composting, but for waste reduction. And then we get I won't laugh at it, $1 for a cyanobacteria mitigation and grant fund. So that was actually as a placeholder bill, as I understand it, by putting it in House Bill 2 to allow us to take grants and do other things, accept monies for cyanobacteria work in the communities. Moving to slide 13. We also, and again, we have some requests that we'd like to see added if you're so willing. One of them is to make a editorial adjustment to House Bill, in House Bill 2 to our Commissioner's Office enabling legislation to allow us to reorganize a little bit our pollution prevention coordinator position. So we think it would be more efficient to have that reside in our waste management division. And this change here on page 13 would allow us to do so. We also, for additional requests, we've been in a position between infrastructure monies and now the Inflation Reduction Act, we have money coming in that we did not envision when we were putting together the budget. So I'll outline these in the following pages, starting on page 15, but you'll notice they're all federal funds that we'd be receiving and asking to move. So the first is the Inflation Reduction Act. This is the greenhouse gas reduction fund. So EPA has over $4.8 billion they're administering for work on climate related issues. The cost of entry to that is each state is allocated up to $3 million to basically put together a climate action plan. New Hampshire's had one for over a decade already, needs to be updated. That's the cost of entry in order to get at this $4.8 billion. So we filed a notice of intent, I think 2 weeks ago at this point, for our up to $3 million. We'll be getting more definition on that in the future. But since we know that money is now coming, we'd like to see that added to the budget rather than to go to fiscal, since we now know that's coming. Similarly, again, we mentioned all the infrastructure bill increases. So with that, we'd like to move some money around. Again, this is federal money for the drinking water SRF. For line C here, we have not only state legislation, but now federal monies that are targeted for childcare facilities and lead in drinking water reductions. So we're rather than go through again outside of the budget, since we know we're able to do this now, we'd like to move some federal funds to HHS. Their Division of Public Health is actually enthusiastic about. They're already working with child care facilities, and they'd like to do more work on this end. And that's, I think, more efficient too. That they have relationships with daycare centers, and that can help our efforts to reduce lead in daycare drinking water. So we want to move money, federal monies for that. Our coastal zone management program, again, especially my Assistant Commissioner Mark Sanborn has been doing a lot of work with offshore wind and potential benefits for New Hampshire. We were looking to move money for membership in the Consensus Building Institute to allow us to work collaboratively on impacts regarding commercial fishing related to offshore wind. And then finally, for our environmental health program, this is a no cost, just moving money. Well, yeah, I guess because you're right. So basically what we're asking is we have an existing program where HHS, Health and Human Services, has $85,000 as part of our combined program. Working with them, we'd like to move that to us, to have us do that portion of that work. So it's a net, not a net gain for the state, but HHS's loss, our gain, so to speak. So that's the line E here, as you see. So Sue's handed out, to the extent you're willing to do all that, some technical corrections to Mike, I think, already. So those are the highlights. As always, we're certainly willing to answer any questions that we can.
Senator Bradley.
Thank you. Are all the councils on board with the proposed changes in HB2?
I'm not sure I can say on board. The chairs were discussed, and I think that, again, I have the directors all behind me, and they've all discussed it amongst themselves, so I don't know where their consensus is at the moment. So just for clarification for the larger group, so the changes, again, this is an outline, would basically have the councils regarding the appeals part of their work be more advisory to a hearings officer. It would reduce the number needed for a quorum. The intent of all that was to make these things go quicker. And then, again, we would move our staff person that supports the councils to the AG's office. And as a side issue, that same process would happen for appeals of our orders. So right now, it's not a great, optics aren't great, in my opinion, that an order, with, you know, a fine, for instance, to an entity is on my letterhead under my name, and then they appeal to me. I like the optics better of they're appealing to a separate agency, so there's a little bit of distance between the two, and they don't have the optics of the fixes in or that type of thing, if that makes sense.
If I could, we can talk offline, but I have heard from one of the council chairs, and I think a little bit more outreach would be a good idea.
Sure.
We have a couple of bills that the Senate passed and put on the table. One is a $5 million appropriation for PFAS. Can you advise us as to the necessity of that bill? As I understand, it would be over and above any dollars that you have right now.
Right. So I guess, let me say this, PFAS is a gift that keeps on giving, right? So there's, I think there's an insatiable appetite for amount of money that could go to PFAS. EPA is looking at setting standards, drinking water standards, much significantly lower than we currently have. That's not set yet. We do have emerging contaminants money over the next 5 years from the infrastructure bill. So that's on the order of $10 million a year more than we were getting in the past. So that can be applied to it. So I'm not here to tell you that everything's going to collapse if we don't get that, but I will tell you if there's additional money for PFAS, we will spend it wisely.
And we also have another bill that makes an appropriation to wastewater grants, but as I look at the funding that we have now restored over the last several biennium of, I think it was $27 million. That bill, I think it was 230, called for a $15 million appropriation in each biennium. How necessary is that? Would it be?
State aid grant.
My understanding was it was meant to replace sort of projects that come in the queue with just a overall appropriation every year.
Yeah. So I think it's, to be blunt, I think it's more important to the towns, obviously, than the agency, and I don't want to belittle that by any means. Again, the state aid grant program is an after-the-fact program. It's not needs-based. It's as you come. So, to be blunt, and I won't be popular here, if I were to design that program, I'd probably have it more needs-based than it currently is. There's always a list, and we go down the list, and again, there's 28 million for that list right now. Historically, it's been stop and go, the program, and I will argue that at one point, prior to my time as commissioner, I think it was an understood thing that those grants were coming, so if municipality was building something, it was a logical expectation. I think under Governor Lynch at the time, that is not the case anymore, and I don't know that anybody has those expectations. So I didn't answer your question, but I put it this way, there's been a lot of money going into water and wastewater between ARPA, the trust fund, and the infrastructure bill, PFAS monies. I'm not, as commissioner, I'm not going to be here saying, oh my gosh, we need even more towards that. I think between the federal government and the state government, everybody's been very generous. There's a lot of problems to go with that, but I'm not here to say that we got to have another 15 million.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions? Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. I have three, I think. Following up on Senator Bradley, we have another bill on the table that appropriates a little under $10 million to build out infrastructure to connect Londonderry, I think it is, to public water system. Is that something that would be helpful?
Yes, it would be helpful. So that would go under the Merrimack River into Litchfield. And the rationale for that would be, and again, you had the energy people before me, so Pennachuck is a regulated entity, so they can't, and that's what the PUC is there for, to make sure they don't, among other things, they can't prospectively build infrastructure without anybody on the other end of it, so to speak, until they've signed people up. So we have a need to go into Londonderry, Litchfield, Hudson, Pelham, you name it, for additional water supply. We have enough in that region between Manchester Waterworks and Pennachuck, but the flow is not there. So this is one case where that water crossing likely couldn't happen but for public monies. Many other projects could, but that one couldn't. So would it be helpful? Yes.
Okay, if I could.
Follow up?
Well, slightly different question. In your increased Superfund cleanup money, does that include money for the Mohawk Tannery project?
So the Mohawk Tannery project is not a Superfund site, but Director Wimsatt's behind me. He's been working, and I was going to say daily, but at least weekly with EPA and the project developer on that. So I believe that's actually in a good place and moving
Director
ahead.
Wimsatt can sit over there, so you don't even have to move.
Just wondering
Honorary
if
committee
the
member, right?
funding, if the state's part of that.
Yes, thank you, Senator. We do
Step right down so you can turn your mic on.
Yep.
Thank you, Senator. We do have funding coming from EPA to help provide some significant oversight to the implementation of the remedy at Mohawk. So yes, that money does include funds for Mohawk.
Okay, and thank you. And my last question, if I could.
Yes, ma'am.
A few years ago, we appropriated $1.6 million to schools and child care centers for lead remediation. I think the last time we got an update, something like $40,000 had been encumbered or spent. Where are we now on that?
For the school part, I think. Oh, sorry, I had it on. Thank you. For the school part, I think some of the slowness was an artifact of you had COVID, so a lot of the schools didn't have people, students in it, et cetera. So we've been working with Commissioner Edelblue. We're looking at taking that program back more directly for the agency. And obviously the law, okay, and the law changed to add daycare centers too. So again, for daycares, we're looking. I talked to Trish Tilley, Director Tilley over at Health and Human Services, and they're actually enthusiastic about working with them, and we'll be working a little bit more directly with the schools now.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for follow-up on Senator Rosenwald's question, I think it was 1.9 million that we got out of the water trust that we gave to the Department of Education. So will they return that money to you if you take over the project?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So they'll return what's left of it.
Right. So I believe there's roughly $1.3 million left, and again, we'll be moving ahead with that for both. Our focus will be on the schools. HHS will be on the daycare.
Right. So we're kind of assured that the job will continue and will get done.
Correct.
At this point, correct. For further questions, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm looking at the federal funds. We went from 39 to 61. We're going to 139 to 144. This is in the Environmental Services Department. Will these increases continue at that rate?
No, they should hold at the rate we're asking for 24, 25. A lot of our bill money is set for the next 5 years. So we will be pretty much consistently asking for this amount, 24, 25, 26, 27. We already received the 22 money.
And nobody ever says no to you, so. Right, that's the way I got it.
I'll believe you.
Okay. Further questions, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
Thank you. the water project that involved Manchester Waterworks, and the money that's flowing down. Now, it's 3 million gallons a day, approximately. Now, is there anything on the table to increase that amount at the present time?
It's funny you mentioned that, because we actually had the part of the agreement, so we have communities, obviously, starting with Manchester Waterworks all the way going down to Plastow. So we have a group meeting, if you will, because this is kind of like synchronized dancing, right? Everybody needs to, water quality problems can cross the borders and et cetera. And how do they fund things? So we actually had that discussion last week, excuse me. And what we have in mind is phase 2. One of the things what we've done for the region is we commissioned a study to look at what are the greater water needs in the surrounding areas, and that study should be done within a couple weeks. So what my intention is once that study's done, is to include in that current group those outlying communities, Hudson and et cetera, and to get an understanding of the appetite for those communities to help fund some additional water flows.
All right, further question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
All right, do we have the capacity in Manchester Waterworks, to present more water, to send more water south? I mean, we're doing 3 million gallons a day now, and we're drawing it out of Massabesic with the other plant that will be under construction to take it out of the Merrimack. When will that be the source of the additional water that we're sending down?
So I'll parse that out a little bit. So you're correct. Right now, the majority is coming from Manchester Waterworks, comes out of Lake Massabesic. There's a radial well to draw and hooks it to draw from the Merrimack.
Right.
I'm trying to remember if it's been commissioned yet. I guess it's not yet, but I'm trying to remember. I've been to different ceremonies with them, and I forget. I think it was the ribbon cutting of starting the breaking ground. So my understanding from talking to Phil Crosdale, the CEO, is they have enough to cover all that extra out of Lake Massabesic. The issue was long-term, and that radial well will cover it. So I don't know the exact timing, but that's the Manchester Waterworks question. The regional question definitely needs to involve Pennachuck. So again, our evaluation is between Manchester Waterworks and between Pennachuck Water Company. There's enough capacity for the regional issues. It's just moving the water, and from whom does it come? And like, for instance, the water crossing, how do we get it to where it needs to be? So our understanding is there is enough capacity. It's just how do you get the water to the people?
Recognizing the fact that capacity, that's going to be a fundamental issue to us in Manchester,
Absolutely.
As well as the other communities. And one further question, Mr. Chair. The monies, the requests that you have, the additional funding request, is federal money going to take care of those? You say that you have 100% federal funds, 100% federal. So you're not asking for any more general fund money?
Correct.
That's correct. We're not asking for any additional general funds.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Rosenbaum, you've been patient.
Thank you. Just one final question about this lead money, the 1.3 million. Is that transfer from education back to DES in the budget somewhere, or do we need language to affect that?
So there's a trust fund thing.
Essentially, we've been paying the Department of Education on a reimbursement basis. So it's never, the money has not left us and is sitting in our appropriations.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions? Senator Bradley.
Yeah, sorry to beat this to death, but the pipeline under the Merrimack, I think the estimated cost was somewhere in the $9 to $10 million. Is there any way that some of the federal dollars can be used for that, or is it has to be a general fund expenditure?
I'm trying to think of the remaining. So for state revolving loan fund monies, it can't be for water system expansion unless there's associated contamination. So it's possible, it's kind of attenuated, so it'd be more difficult. But again, we've kind of burned through the ARPA money, which was grant money. We're at the point now, we're talking, even though it's a lot more money, we're talking SRF loans. So we'd still need to, I'm thinking as I talk, which is not a good, you'd like to think I always think as I talk. But the conundrum for Pennachuck, that would mean we'd have to give them a loan and they'd have to take on that liability, and I'd have the same problem, they'd have the same problem with the PUC, because there's no end users at the other end.
So it does have to be a general fund.
I'm not aware, I can't think of any other, where the money would come from otherwise. Like I said, at one point, we had a lot of ARPA money, but we've already allocated that.
Thank you.
If you would look at that and a little further and then send back to Deb if you find anything that's different than what you testified, appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, additional questions? Thank you very much. Come on up, Commissioner. Department of Agriculture, Market and Foods.
Good afternoon.
Hit your button.
Good afternoon, Senators. For the record, I am Sean Jasper, Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food. I'm going to try to give you some of your time back here. I intend to be very brief on this budget. We didn't ask for a lot, and we weren't given a lot. So within this budget, there are really three major items in personnel. One is moving the position of State Executive Director for the State Conservation Commission from part-time, to full-time. The governor had taken that out of the budget. We were asking for general funds, and in the process also took out the funding for the part-time position, leaving no personnel there. When we went to the House, we asked for that position to be restored as full-time, but taking the monies from the conservation fund, so no general funds were involved in that, and the House graciously agreed to that. Last year, in a Senate bill, the position of invasive species coordinator was created and a fund was set up for materials. However, there was no funding for the position that was created. So in this budget, we have asked to fund the position that was created in the last budget, or in a bill, I think it was, excuse me. I've also asked for an assistant commissioner, something that I've seen the need for pretty much from day one as commissioner. And this is the first time I've actually asked for it, because intervening things in the previous two budgets came along that made those other requests more important than the assistant commissioner's position. But we are currently at full-time staffing of 41 people, with 5 part-time positions that are currently filled. We also now have a embedded IT person. So those are really the three things that we have asked for within the budget that are different. Within House Bill 2, there is also funding for IT needs. That was a separate House bill, and the House folded that into House Bill 2. I'd be glad to answer any questions, but I don't think there's any need for me to go into any more detail on our relatively small budget compared to the one you just heard.
Senator D'Alessandro, you have your mic on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just the OIT, you're going from a kind of a minor appropriation of 15,000 to 236 and then 253 in the next 2 years. What are we hooking on to? What are we upgrading in order to deal with that?
First of all, I apologize. I did not introduce
Michelle Tebow, who is the department's administrative assistant. And would you like to speak to that?
Thank you. A lot of our departments within our agency have a separate IT budget. And to make it more convenient, the general fund money, we all lumped it into the commissioner's fund and took it out of the other general funded budgets.
You consolidated, actually, the number's the same, but it's a consolidation.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Roy.
Thank you. It looks like you're creating a new program with the fairs.
That was a House bill from last year that was sponsored by Representative Ladd to create a fund for infrastructure for the fairs. And so that fund was previously created. And I think we did ask for some replenishment of that.
Like 250,000. I guess my question was, did the department consider starting back up its organic certification program instead with that amount of general funds?
No. Organic certification is something that only a few states do. Actually, it is something that the feds don't want us to do, and it is extremely expensive. But the bigger problem is getting personnel. With what we have left, we're experiencing a problem. We're evaluating our ability to do anything organic moving forward because of the costs. We currently only have one certified person, and obviously that certified person can't certify her own work. And so we're trying to get other people trained, but the one person we have who's fully certified will be retiring next year. So organics is really a problem. And the FAIR bill was a legislative initiative which we're just carrying forward.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you got us back on track. Yeah. All right. And the judicial. Maybe they're out in the hall.
I don't know.
I don't think so.
Hello.
Okay.
Hi.
Judicial branch.
Well, we got judicial branch, we got judicial justice department, we got judicial council.
Judge, you're looking good. Thank you, Senator. Where did you go?
Thank you.
That's the introductory.
Okay, we all have your presentation now.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you very much for your time. With me is Donna Raymond, who is the fiscal manager of the judicial branch. Also with me is Susan Ashley, who's the deputy administrative judge for the circuit court. Diane Martin, who is the director of the administrative office of the courts. Karen Gorham, who is our superior court administrator, and Alex Cassell, who is our drug court statewide coordinator. I do have some slides, and I know members have them. My intent is to run through the slides as quickly and efficiently as possible. Slide 2 is a statement of our mission, something that we live and believe in and work every day to strive for, which is to do our best to protect the rights and liberties guaranteed under our constitutions while delivering fair and impartial justice promptly and efficiently. On slide 3, you will see our overall budget objectives. Number 1 is to begin to address needs identified in something called the weighted caseload study. And I'll get into that in detail, but basically the weighted caseload study was a study we undertook last year. It's an established methodology, evidence-based, to determine how many judges and court staff we need in our trial courts. Second objective is to enhance our court security. Third, to respond to inflationary pressures that I know we are all feeling and the committee is dealing with across the board. And fourth, to provide additional funding for our drug courts. On the next slide, you see the structure of the judicial branch. We have two trial courts, the Superior Court and the Circuit Court, one appellate court, the Supreme Court, and we are all supported by the Administrative Office of the Courts. I want to go through and just give you some background on a court-by-court basis. We'll start with the Circuit Court. Circuit Court was established by this legislature in 2011. It combined what was then the District Court, the Family Division of the Superior Court, and the Probate Court into one court. On page 6, you will see our 34 locations across the state, and we currently have 42 full-time circuit court judges on the bench. There are also some other judicial resources that we use, and I'll get into that a little bit later. On the next slide, slide 7, you will see the case volume in our circuit courts for the time period that we measured for our weighted caseload study. And you will see it's 126,000 cases spread among the case types that are in circles. I should note that these case volumes do fluctuate year to year. They were a bit down for 2021, but these were the data that we used in our weighted caseload study. You can see the largest single case type in circuit court are criminal trials. Our circuit court handles our misdemeanors, and then its civil jurisdiction is really highly specialized among the 3 divisions. Next, Superior Court. Superior Court is our court of general jurisdiction. It handles all jury trials, all felony cases, and generally civil matters with a value over $25,000. On page 9, you will see our locations around the state. We have 11 Superior Courts, 1 in each county, 2 in Hillsborough, in Manchester and Nashua. We have 21 Associate Justices on the Superior Court and 1 Chief Justice. There is a vacancy at the current moment. On the next slide, you can see our summary of case volume in the Superior Court. And the largest cohort of cases is by far criminal and parole revocation related cases. So it's mostly criminal and then about 6,000 civil cases. On the next slide, you'll see slide 11, the basic facts about our budget. Personnel, not surprisingly, is 73% of our budget. And as the committee well knows, those costs are essentially fixed. Our other major cost centers, we have limited control over. We make transfer payments to our sheriffs to provide court security in our superior courts. We make a transfer payment to DAS, which provides support in all of our court facilities. We pay rent in many of our locations in the circuit court, and our technology costs are essentially contractual and basically fixed. We are 95% generally funded. So I want to talk just for a few minutes about this weighted caseload study. The essential question is, how do we credibly come before you and tell you what resources we need to process cases on behalf of the people of New Hampshire? And in 2005, this legislature endorsed a methodology called the weighted caseload methodology. And it was undertaken in 2005 and not undertaken again until 2022 when this legislature provided some support for us to do the study. There are a variety of ways you can assess how many judges and court staff you need, but this is the most reliable and it's evidence-based. On slide 13, you can see some of the other choices in terms of methodologies, and again, the legislature has picked this one. Slide 14 describes the basic metrics of the weighted caseload methodology. And again, I don't want to get into it in detail because of our limited time. Certainly, if any members of the committee want a more fulsome briefing on what this is and what went into it, I'd be happy to provide that. The basic metric that we use is to capture, and we did this over a period of 29 days last year, to capture the amount of time that our trial judges and our trial court processing staff use to process cases on a case type by case type basis. And then we take those data and we annualize it and divide it among the resources that we have, and we come up with what is called a case weight. And that's the basic measurement that we use to come to you and tell you what we think, based on this methodology, we need to process cases in our state courts. On page 15, we did not do this study ourselves. We retained something called the National Center for State Courts, highly respected resource based in Williamsburg, Virginia, that supports all of our state courts. They've conducted a weighted caseload studies for judges in 35 states and staff in 24 states. On page 16, you will see, again, the data that we captured. The key piece of data that we captured was the time spent by our judges and court processing staff, and we had 100% participation across the judicial branch of those participating. And we're really proud of that, and that means that the data that underlie this study are really reliable and complete. So page 17 is a summary of our results. And the National Center for State Courts found that a total of 563.77 judges and staff are necessary to support our caseload levels. And broken down by court, that means that it's about 50 net plus positions than we have now. And broken down by court, it's about 37 in the circuit court and 13 roughly in Superior Court. And I just want to footnote that. We'll come back to it. There's another piece of data that we also studied that augments these numbers. On the next slide, you can see how the National Center broke it down by the various categories that we looked at. So for instance, on the circuit court, it concluded that 65.67 judges were needed over the 44 used in our study for a net of 21 additional judges. In Superior Court, the difference is, if you look at the far right-hand column, 3.5 judges. And again, at the bottom, adding up both judges and court staff, it's about 50. If you see on the very bottom right-hand side, 49.79. So here's what I wanted to get back to. The study also analyzed how much case processing is done by our clerks and deputy clerks in all of our locations. Because of our shortages, clerks and deputy clerks are diverting from their usual jobs in order to process cases. And this study actually was able to tease out how much of that work is impounded in our clerks and deputy clerks. And for the circuit court, you will see it's almost 40 full-time equivalents in terms of work that would otherwise be done by a court assistant is being performed by either a clerk or deputy clerk. And in the Superior Court, it's 17.5. The next slide, I won't go into detail. The bottom line is we took, in the circuit court, we took the number of judges that the National Center suggested we needed to have and trued it up with reality of where we are in terms of our staffing now. And the bottom line is at the very bottom, total shortfall is once it's trued up, it comes down from 21 to 17.3. That's slide 20. Slide 21 relates principally to the circuit court. And this shows, this slide demonstrates what the impact of delay is on the public. As I said, the circuit court is a court of really highly specialized jurisdiction. Most of its case types, or many of its case types, are governed by really detailed statutes. And many of those statutes have timelines embedded in them. So when Judge Ashley and Judge King are making decisions about allocating resources, those case types, which are listed at the top of the slide, are necessarily put at the top of the pile so that they get the attention that is warranted under the respective statutes. And of course, criminal cases have constitutional requirements. Those that don't have statutory deadlines tend to come to the bottom of the pile, and those include divorce and parenting cases, small claims, and others. So that is the reality of how the circuit court is triaging its caseload. On the next slide, just a summary. Again, our budget is principally, overwhelmingly targeted at meeting the needs identified in this evidence-based study. Our request, as submitted by the governor and approved by the House, is intended to take significant steps to close the gaps which the study identified, mindful, obviously, of the overall budget constraints facing the state. So on slide 23, you'll see a summary of our budget requests. And these requests were, again, informed by the study. So we have requested, and the House approved, 7 new judges in the circuit court. That's of the 17 that were identified in the study, and 1 new judge in the Superior Court of the 3.5 identified in the study. In terms of court staff, we're requesting 31 new clerical staff in the circuit court, 1 new clerk in the circuit court, and 4 new clerical staff in the Superior Court, and 1 new law clerk. And these requests, again, are supported by the data in the study. Our next area of priority is enhancing courthouse security. This is going to be a multi-biennial effort, and it's part of a larger effort. In fact, the Senate has approved legislation that would provide training for our court security officers at police standards and training. In our budget, we are seeking for our court security officers to be equipped with standardized equipment across the board. They currently don't have that, and in all cases, are relying on their own personal, for instance, firearms in delivering their services to us. Our next objective is to respond to inflationary pressures. We have a terrible, trying time retaining staff, and I know you've heard this from other agencies and other elements of the state government, and we're responding to that by requesting or providing for labor grade adjustments in our court staff as set forth here. We are literally, as Judge Ashley can tell you, losing court staff, have lost court staff to fast food establishments. They can make more going across the street. We are also seeking to increase our per diem rates for both court security officers and sheriffs in the amount in the slide, and increase our technology spending to respond to inflationary pressures. The next slide, our Superior Court drug court program is highly successful and really a national, has won New Hampshire national acclaim. 1,700 people have participated in its programs over the years. The issue that we're facing there is, again, pressure on by inflation and other competitive forces in terms of what we're able to pay the providers who help support participants in the drug court program. So the increase there is about $650,000. Next slide. As submitted by the governor, we have requested, and these adjustments were made by the House, decreases in rental payments that we no longer are going to incur, security and alarms, which we were able to secure some ARPA funds for, salaries for positions that, that aren't needed, and then benefits adjustments on our, medical and dental. And the positions that aren't needed are going to be otherwise funded by federal grants. The next slide shows an overview over our adjusted authorized in the House passed version. You can see the adjustments in there. One positive adjustment made since the submission was an addition of $70,199 in the first year of the biennium, and that is for paid family medical leave. We did not have that figure when we submitted the budget. So overall, year-to-year change in the first year is 6.1% and then 3% in the second year. But the next slide is really important. We've broken it down by what increases are reflected in the weighted caseload study and which are not. So our overall budget increase, if you subtract out the weighted caseload study, increases is 0.4%, 0.4%. If you add it all in, including weighted caseload, the net adjustment is, as I just said, 6.1%. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the presentation. Be happy to respond to questions.
Questions? Senator Rosenbaum.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. You know, we're going to talk more about this in fiscal on Friday, but where is the mental health docket located? And how many people are part of it?
The mental health docket is located in the Concord Circuit Court.
Okay.
And there's one full-time dedicated judge who will be there at Senator on Friday.
Will be?
Will be there.
Is. Oh, will be in fiscal.
At fiscal on Friday. Judge Ryan Guptal, and then he's supplemented by judges as needed.
Thank you.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Donna, very much. Just a couple of quickies. We don't own one Superior Court, correct? What county owns their own Superior Court?
Which counties?
Yes.
Which county building? Which Superior Courts does the state own, and which are owned by counties?
Come on up. You can sit in the other chair over there so we can, they won't be able to hear you in Zoom land or YouTube land unless you get into a mic and hit the button so you turns it red.
And introduce yourself. Good afternoon. My name is Karen Gorham, and as the Chief Justice indicated earlier, I am the Superior Court Administrator. Currently, the counties that were, the buildings that are owned by the county, Stratford County Superior Court is owned by the county. Sullivan County Superior Court is also a county building. Belknap Superior Court is a county building. I believe that covers the 3 of the 11 Superior Courts that are county-owned buildings.
Follow up?
Okay. And do we rent those? Do we pay rent for those buildings?
Yes.
Okay. And tell me how much usage the Jaffrey Court gets. Judge, that's been a pain in my neck since they built it.
Jaffrey is a circuit court.
Yes, I know.
It serves about 11 towns out there. There is at least one full-time judge in Jaffrey. It's used. I mean,
Well, it's a beautiful building. I know. It's set up where it is with all that parking out in front, but I never see a car there, to be honest with you. So, I know in the old days, unless the land was given to us, we didn't build a district court, but now that's all changed. But that's been a thought of mine for a number of years.
We have closed Plastow. used to be a circuit court location, and it's been closed for that reason. But I've not heard that concern about Jaffrey, Senator.
Well,
And I'm glad that you haven't been there when court is in session and all the cars are there,
Yeah.
Senator. So.
Well, I've driven by there a number of times for a number of years, so an accumulation of cars may be the answer to that one. Judge, the circuit courts, just heard some comments about the time it takes to get something done, and obviously I represent Manchester, a lot of action there. Will the addition of these judges that you've asked for, will they answer that, or is it just a partial answer to a more in-depth question?
It will be a significant step towards answering it, and we are sensitive to the time it takes and the impact that it has on the people we serve. I mean, these are real people with real disputes who are waiting for answers from judges. But our judges, as I tried to explain, are extremely busy, and they necessarily need to triage and do certain case types first. Will the addition of 7 circuit court judges absolutely solve the problem? I can't tell you that, Senator, but will it be a significant step in the right direction? Yes. And I will also say that our budget request is heavily focused on getting additional staff, because judges can rule and issue orders, but unless literally the staff are there to help process those orders, to take the order and put it in an envelope and make sure it gets in the mail, we're not really moving the needle on the problem that we're facing.
And just to follow up, if I might.
Yes, sir.
Of Senator Rosenwell's question. Judge, it's very difficult for me to put my arms around mental health diagnosis is done, virtually. And I get calls all the time, really on a daily basis, about people who have mental problems and have no place to go, and so forth and so on. Is that a good way for us to deal with these problems? I mean, because in the final analysis, it's the result of that conversation that will give a place to go, or treatment methodology that's put in place.
You mean conducting telephonic hearings as opposed to video hearings?
Yeah.
And we're going to be discussing that at fiscal on Friday.
Yes,
Ideally, we want to do.
You're ready.
I can see. We would ideally like to be conducting video hearings. In fact, Judge Ashley can correct me, but I think before COVID, we were generally providing video hearings, so we need to get back to that.
Well, I think so. And I want to compliment both you and Donna. I've been around this table a long period of time, and the presentation was concise, it was accurate, you've expressed the needs. I mean, we've got to react to those needs, obviously, but it's pretty clear as to what they are. And I think that's the important thing for us to present to our body and to the other house.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Additional questions from committee members? Senator Bradley.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How are you? So the Senate has passed and sent to the House, I believe it's Senate Bill 252. It's Senator Soucy's bill, very similar to the bill that I sponsored before, that would have changes made to our bail statute. So one of the things that has occurred in the past is we've heard testimony that there's not enough judges to implement it. But I guess my question is, if we fund the 8 new judges that are requested, will that be sufficient to handle I think it's 12 types of crimes that would have to come before a judge before somebody could be released on bail?
The weighted caseload study did not analyze the impact of any changes on bail, and did not study the impact of felonies first, which, as the committee knows, was repealed effective January 1st, 2024. So the answer is that if, depending on what happens with House Bill 252, additional judges would be needed. Our fiscal note says 4 additional judges.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Judicial Council.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Samperl. I'm the acting executive director of the New Hampshire Judicial Council. I've been there since December. The Judicial Council, as I'm sure this group knows, is not part of the judicial branch. It's a executive branch agency that is responsible for the delivery of legal services and the oversight of that delivery in indigent defense cases and in other areas where we have partnerships with legal assistance and with CASA of New Hampshire and providing other services in related types of cases. There's 3 people who work in the Judicial Council. There's the executive director and 2 employees. We have a variety of responsibilities in those cases I've described to you. I'm not going to go through them all in detail today. But I would say that the budget that's before you at this point has certainly a necessary increase to address what has been an ongoing indigent defense crisis over the past 3 years. And you'll see from some of the information I provided to you in the slide materials that the revised budget that is currently applicable to the agency reflects some of those increased costs and increased demands in trying to find lawyers to take these cases and create an incentive for those people to provide representation that is necessary. But I would also just begin by saying that we'd ask this committee to maintain the appropriation levels that were submitted in the governor's budget and were affirmed by the budget that was passed by the House. The Judicial Council has always taken its fiscal responsibility seriously. Past budgets, I believe, reflect this, but as I said, indigent defense is at a crossroads, has been in a crisis, and although funding itself isn't going to resolve all of those issues, it is incredibly difficult to see a path forward without that additional funding. We have we have 8 budget lines that are summarized before you today that provide criminal and civil services. We have a different role as to each. I'd like to actually begin by skipping to page 7 or slide 7 with the notes and begin with a discussion of indigent defense funding. The state's funding for indigent defense in criminal cases fulfills the state's constitutional requirement to provide criminal representation to those who cannot afford it. And the state has a 3-tiered system of representation. The first tier would be the public defender program. Cases that it can't handle go to contract counsel. Cases that contract counsel can't accept go to assigned counsel. I think it's critical to understand our budget request to know that in the past, the public defender would typically handle about 85% of the cases through the indigent defense system. And then it would go to contract counsel, which would handle about another 14%, and then assigned counsel would sort of handle that last 1%. Over the last 3 years, that shifting of caseloads, that organization or distribution of caseloads has shifted dramatically. And the public defender for a period of time, was handling about 80% of the cases, which is only a decrease in 5%, but it's a very significant decrease overall. And what that meant is there was a much greater reliance on the contract counsel system. The problem is we've also lost contract counsel. We've lost approximately 9 in the last 3 years. It's very difficult to replace them. It's just not financially viable for a lot of people to take a contract and provide that kind of representation. And what that means is we have relied most heavily on assigned counsel to fill that gap. And those are lawyers who are in private practice that are getting paid on an hourly basis to handle the overload. One of the major reasons that there is an increase in our budget request is because those lawyers and other lawyers who are providing services under the indigent defense system were being paid at a rate that was, frankly, unmaintainable. The criminal defense rate was set in 1992, and fortunately, with the support of the governor and the governor's staff and the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court judges, we have seen now an increase in that pay rate from $60 an hour to $90 an hour in most cases, and then in major cases, a slightly higher rate. But that represents part of why we're asking for such an increase here, is because that increased pay rate translates to an increased invoice and billing rate from lawyers who are actually providing the services. Similarly, services that are provided in cases that are constitutionally mandated have also been going up, and there's an increased need for those services because of things like the opioid crisis. We foresee an increase in those types of expenses because of the YDC criminal litigation. And other things like that. The increased homicide rate over the last year will probably have an impact as well. And those are all issues that have resulted in this agency having to go back and asking for additional funding, additional appropriations before the governor and council and joint fiscal. I'd like to just talk about the New Hampshire Public Defender in particular for a moment. We're asking for an increase there. I will try to make the point to this committee that our first and greatest priority in the efficient administration of justice is to see through this increase to the public defender program. Inadequate funding of this particular program will result in further cost shifting to these other more costly providers. And so it's critical to the Judicial Council that that be funded. Part of the reason we're asking for that increased funding is so that they can be competitive, that they can have employees stay and provide experienced legal representation to individuals. You'll see through the materials that I provided, and this is represented in pages 8 and 9 of the slide materials I provided to you, that there's an incredible amount of attrition at the public defenders over the past 3 years, not just in terms of the number of staff, but more significantly in terms of the experience in years that those staff represent. And the new director of the program, who took her position in August of 2022, is present here, but has really done, in my opinion, an exceptional job recruiting new people, working on issues of retention so that there will be continued staffing. But part of that requires competitive salaries, which is part of this request, and a ability to handle the types of cases that they're receiving. And you'll see on page 10 of the materials that electronic discovery has, in the last 5 years, increased 450%, which is really very difficult to comprehend. But that's the inclusion of things like video on police officers and electronic data being transmitted and provided in those files. And so part of their request also represents an increase for IT paralegals to help with this, which is also the way the court is going, because that's the way evidence has to be introduced in the courts going forward. And that's not particular to the public defender in New Hampshire. That is sort of an industry norm going forward. So that is a significant part of that. Just to switch quickly to contract attorneys, which is on page 11, there is an increase there. Again, as I've indicated, we have lost contract lawyers. We need to retain the lawyers we have and to create an incentive for new people to provide services under that program. And that's what this increase represents. We've lost 9 lawyers, so that represents 900 cases that would have gone through the contract system that now go to assigned counsel instead. And as I've mentioned, and this would be now page 12, the assigned counsel system. This is not just criminal defense lawyers. This is also lawyers who provide services in abuse and neglect cases. It's also including guardians who are not not part of the CASA system. And there is an increased rate there, and the increased funding is necessary to pay for those individuals. So all of the hope here is that over the course of the next biennium, this will put our 3-tiered public defender indigent defense system back at least on track to where it was before, where the vast majority of cases which are currently being handled by the public defender will continue to be, but at a higher level, that there will be less reliance ultimately on the assigned counsel system and more cost-effective representation for the state. I'm happy to talk about any of those things. I did not want to forget the additional requests that we've made with respect to New Hampshire legal assistance. Legal assistance is providing a variety of civil legal services that in part are funded through the state, and they currently would be using additional funding to focus on their domestic violence advocacy project. There's a pilot program that is currently taking place in limited courts that allows not only lawyers but certain paralegals to provide assistance in those types of cases. And so additional funding there would allow an identification of the most serious cases and assistance in those most serious types of cases. So again, not every case, but just the most serious cases. CASA, as I'm guessing this group is probably well familiar with, is the preferred provider of guardian ad litem services in abuse and neglect cases. By statute, they are appointed first. If they cannot accept the guardian ad litem appointment, then it goes to the non-CASA GALs, which we pay. And so the additional money for CASA would be to allow them to engage in further training and supervision of their volunteers, which I think are universally understood to be very committed to the work that they do and in it for the long haul, and that additional CASA funding would allow greater involvement and hopefully the recruitment of more volunteers to provide those services. I've tried to cover everything in some way without going in a too detailed a manner to put you to sleep as I'm the last person before the break, but I am happy to answer any questions.
Excuse me, I'm letting the cat out of the bag.
But any questions that the committee has, I'm happy to answer.
So Senator D'Alessandro already has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I reckon, first of all, thanks for coming and thanks for the presentation. And I think the key is the different percentages now, what it was with, I guess you said, I have not now the 85%, but it's less than that as we move forward. So fewer people in the public defender role, so you have to get the more expensive counsels as we move down the line. Your increases are fairly hefty. And you do have the authority to come back to the fiscal committee anytime you need more money, and I don't think we have the right to refuse, right? I mean, you have the right, but that's never been refused as long as I've been around. And I mean, the base number is about a $12 million increase, that aggregate, in the first year, and you're stable in the second year. It's de minimis. Maybe it's a $10,000 increase in the second year. But a $12 million increase I mean, I understand, but that's very significant in this business.
I appreciate your question and your asking it. I would respectfully disagree about the size of the increase, and the reason for that is, as you point out, the Judicial Council can, because it has to pay bills that the courts have authorized, can go back and ask for additional appropriations. So our true revised budget in '23 is 37.6 million. So our increase requested here is really under 6 million to what our actual revised budget, what we're actually paying in bills today is.
So, further point, Mr. Chair.
Follow up?
So if we were to ask you, what was your actual spend for fiscal year 2023, it would be above what the authorized was.
It's currently almost exactly 6 million more than the authorized.
So plus 6 million?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rosenbaum?
Thank you. I'm a little confused by that. I'm looking at page 671, which is the assigned counsel.
You have the full book in front
I'm
of you.
sorry. So it looks like you're increasing
Well,
from.
let's let him get to the
Yeah,
page.
sorry.
If you would, please.
Oh, thank you.
Did you say 671?
Yeah, 671.
Yeah, I'm looking at the assigned counsel and the contract counsel. Between the two of them, it looks like you're increasing about $4 million a year in the budget. But from what was the adjusted authorized in 2023 of like $1.5 million and 2 million, so 3.5 million. What did we actually appropriate, including every time you came to fiscal for this year between assigned and contract counsel?
So for contract counsel, there has not been an additional appropriation.
Okay.
In fact, out of all of the areas where we have had to come back and ask for more, it's the one area, because we're losing lawyers, that we haven't had to ask for additional funding. In terms of assigned counsel, I believe, and this is on page 12. We went back and asked for it, and I'm sorry, I should have that exact amount. I can't remember if it's 1.5 or 1.6 additional million for assigned counsel.
I see. So I'm sorry if I can follow up, this revised budget, does that include all the money appropriated
It
for
does,
fiscal?
yes. Yeah.
So it looks like you were budgeted 1.5, but you came back and we gave you another 1.5.
Right, and so part of the issue I think that the council is facing is the increase to the hourly rate for lawyers in assigned counsel and other categories went into effect on October 1st of '22. So we really are only seeing that increase show up in statements and in invoices in the last few months. And anticipating sort of a full year of that increase, I think there's going to be much higher invoices.
Thank you.
Additional questions?
Yeah, just a point, Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
D'Alessandro.
That's why the real number, it would be very important. Yeah, I'm sure that you'll be able to bring that when you have those invoices in place. And we don't know, it's not going to be till by the end of June, because we'll be finished by then, but it will be close enough to that point in time where we know what the actual was, what the actual spend was.
Right, and I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of nervous about getting to the end and not having enough money.
Sure.
I mean, and that's, hopefully it's covered, it's in the appropriation, but the other thing about going forward is, I'm looking at, big cases on the horizon, like the YDC cases
Yes.
and, homicides, and, am nervous about being in a position to tell people who are, willing maybe to take those cases that I am gonna have to go back and ask for more money.
If I could, Mr. Chairman,
Senator.
that's why I think it's very important for the legislature to get from Judge Broderick what's happened in terms of those settlements. Because if those settlements are made, that you don't have to go to court.
Well,
But it's the court cases that are hanging out there that I worry about.
I apologize
No,
if
sure.
I can, because I perhaps was not clear, but I'm talking about the criminal cases.
Yes, and that's what I was referring to. Broderick's taking care of $100 million worth of cases, but those that are going to court, that's a different story.
So even the ones that Justice Broderick is negotiating and resolving, the ones that are not included,
Yes.
those are still just the civil cases. I'm not talking about any of the civil cases. I'm talking about the criminal, there are 11 criminal prosecutions that have arose from those civil cases. And just to put it in perspective, there is approximately 30 million pages of discovery. It is unprecedented.
Yeah, well, if I could, it's certainly the unknown, and it has a dramatic effect on you. I understand that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Additional questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
We did get scheduled for a 15-minute break, but you've only got 2 departments left. Unless somebody says, I need time, I'm going to press on. All right, we will be in recess till, I guess, 5 minutes on that clock right there. Get everyone.
We did, but they're gonna take note of all the things we talked about, but it was unanimous, it was a good discussion. Yeah. I didn't think we were gonna go for it, but then,
All right. I'm sure Senator Birdsell will be back here in a minute. Is you ready, Deb? Yep. Okay. Well, out of recess and Department of Corrections.
Well, good afternoon, honorable senators. I appreciate the opportunity. For the record, Helen Hanks, Commissioner of the Department of Corrections, and to my right is John Hanson, our Director of Administration. So I've provided you a packet. I don't want you to think I'm going to go through the whole packet. There is an attachment that gives you some other just useful demographic information about the department in and of itself. On the first page, that packet has our symbol on it, like this. I think it's important to articulate what the agency's mission is, and that's to reduce recidivism and provide safe, secure, and humane supervision and evidence-based rehabilitation to enhance public safety in New Hampshire. Indicate the sections of statute and what we're required to do in an abridged way. I'm not going to read through that. I'm sure you all know. On page 2, I focus on our personnel classes, specifically high-level, high-funding requirements. And just as a point of clarification, I should have started off, I do not have the numbers included here for the Adult Parole Board, and I do not have the federally funded Victim Office VOCA funds for victim services because they're not general funded in this presentation. Going back to page 2. What you'll see is our actual from 2022, the adjusted authorized from 2023. The difference in those personnel lines is the 27 pay periods. You'll see that in 2024 it goes down because of 26 pay periods and goes up again in 2025 simply because of those pay periods. That is actually between 2023 and 2024 a reduction in costs of 2.72%. And then in 2024 to 2025, an increase of 2.83%, just to give you a reflection of cost trending. The prescription drug section, what you'll see in the proposed in 2024 and 2025 is a reflection of us having the contracted rates for our health care and psychiatric care. So those who sit on Senate Finance, you know, we came back and asked for those funding. That funding is in the 2024 and 2025 with the hope that we don't have to use the footnote that we asked for in that biennium budget. So the difference of the 2023 in the medical expenses, specifically the Class 101, will be higher at the end of this year by approximately 5.6%, $5.6 million. The other classes are heat, electricity, and water. Those are as variable as our households, and we run 3 prisons, 1 psychiatric unit, 3 transitional housing units, transitional work center, and then 11 district offices across the state. So that is the line that we draw from to pay for those services throughout the year. You'll see an increase in our Office of Information Technology expenses. Those expenses do go up because we're trying to create efficiency in our workforce by adding technology. It is common knowledge that we struggle with our vacancy rate in our corrections officer ranks, and we're trying to give those corrections officers some technology to create efficiency in their daily workflow. That includes costs associated with our offender management system, costs associated even on our healthcare side with our electronic health record, but other interesting technology that will help create efficiencies in our daily rounding, passing out of property, and other complex correctional tasks that corrections officers engage in. You'll see our equipment line goes up. Our agency needs equipment. We have some very aged vehicles across the organization, including our warehouse and logistics vehicles, as well as security vehicles that are in the perimeter and are critical in our security perimeter force. So that is one of the largest increases you'll see in our equipment ask, is to continue to rectify significantly aged vehicles that we use also for transporting residents to healthcare appointments and court appointments as well. In addition to working on our actual radio supply, I know on our capital budget request, we asked for the infrastructure to advance our radio system, but we also have to procure and buy new radios. That's included in the equipment line. You see that increase there. The equipment increase is the most substantial from the actual of 2023, the adjusted authorized of 2023 and the actual in 2022. And then we have total operational costs, and those I'll go into more detail moving further. On page 3, our agency is 74%. Our cost is individuals, employees, and those services, salaries, and benefits. We have 973 full-time positions that are funded in this proposed budget, and we also have the 5.49 set aside for overtime, with the continued ask to use what's been effective, which is a footnote to come back before fiscal and governor and council to transfer funding out of Class 10 and other expenses associated with those vacant positions into overtime, so that we can continue to be aggressive in our recruitment efforts and trying to rectify increasing our workforce. On page 4, I dive into those medical and pharmaceutical expenses, and we continue to ask for the opportunity, unforeseen circumstances, to come back to fiscal and governor and council if we exceed those costs, because we are the agency that has the constitutional requirement to provide health care to people incarcerated, and that's true across the nation. On page 5, I dive into food, current expense, and equipment in more detail. Talked about those in depth off the first page. The other equipment people don't realize is we have to replace things like dental chairs and x-ray equipment and other healthcare needs within the organization, and that's to our benefit. What services we can provide locally reduces the number of transports outside of our facility. So some of those additional costs are associated with our dental suite. Currently at the men's prison, we have a dental suite at the North Country facility, as well as the women's correctional facility in Concord. So we need to keep our eye on replacing those tools, literally dental chairs and other equipment, to make sure we're providing adequate dental care. On page 6, I dive into the utilities just to show some history. We are making an ask, and the House supported, including that footnote, that if in an unforeseen circumstance the cost of utilities is far more than forecasted, then we can come back before fiscal and ask for additional appropriation. That has been a challenge for us this current budget year, that our utilities were much more expensive than had been previously forecasted. So we would only leverage that if it continued to be the case in 2024 and 2025. I go into more detail on the IT expenses, including actual hardware and overlay, because we need to advance the delivery of our education and vocational services. The federal government's reauthorization of the Second Chance Pell Grant has afforded us an opportunity, and we are engaged in that process with White Mountain Community College and NHTI, in affording people the opportunity to get associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, and the like while incarcerated, and that has been clearly demonstrated as an activity to reduce recidivism, in hoping that people do not return to incarceration post-release, and a great investment to be in that space now. Let's see, on page 7, dive into rents and leases. We are moving to a leased model with our conductive energy weapons. Those are tasers. Currently, we're in a purchase model with the exception of our field services division. We went to a lease model, and that model has demonstrated its effectiveness in us not having equipment that actually expires. So this brings the rest of the organization into a leased model with our taser equipment that we do on occasion have to use in an incarcerated setting. We made a strong investment in employee development and training. Part of recruitment is also working toward retention and investing in our employee workforce and providing them opportunities to learn advanced skills in the area of corrections and field services. And we put money in that budget to essentially look to try to provide those opportunities for every single employee, so we can invest in them and let them know that we're invested in them as part of our organization. And then contracting for program services, we do have funding for our automated victim notification system through VOCA, but we will not be receiving continued funding for that, so we've incorporated that into our budget. You'll see that on page 7. those amounts for 24 and 25. And then we are implementing body-worn cameras and vehicle cameras, which will, again, help us in our spans of litigation to show what actually happened and what didn't happen, so we can close those issues quickly and give another tool for transparency. And I think that's important in any law enforcement space and should not be a surprise that corrections is moving in that pathway. So these funds continue to fund that initiative in the next biennium budget. We're on the cusp of implementing those in the agency now. All right. Page 8 goes through the House passed HB2 requests that we've made. I should pause, and do you want me to wait for questions at the very, very end, sir? I'll just keep going.
If they want to ask a question, they're not shy.
All right. Okay. Cognizant you had a 5-minute break, so I'm rapid firing at you, so I just want to make sure I don't go too fast.
Go for it.
All right. We continue to ask again for the transfer authority that I referenced with regard to our personnel classes. That has again been highly motivating, so our team knows we're recruiting for those and not trying to just fund overtime at the expense of employees' work-life balance. And then the next footnote referenced on page 8 are pages 2 and 4 of HB2. It takes high-level positions. We certainly learned through COVID-19 that our deputy directors would be better served and function as an unclassified employees because they are often the backup to our directors, and having them available 24 hours a day as essentially salaried employees, the benefit to the state and to these positions within the agency. So they would go through the Joint Commission of Employee Classifications process and transfer over from classified to unclassified employees. Those employees are aware that we've made that ask and are in favor of that moving forward, so we want to also be cognizant that those employees who have value know where we were headed as an organization and our ask of the House and the Senate and the Governor. That continues on to page 9, and on the bottom of page 9, there are 3 positions that I identify with the sunsetting of the piece of legislation that allowed the agency to work through the retirement board and the director of the Division of Personnel. We added licensed nursing assistants. We had not had those. We found those very effective in our infirmary units in supporting our other nursing disciplines. So they work one-on-one, meet the statutory definition of Group 2 correctional line personnel, and have been included in here. The other title, which is the administrator of the secure psychiatric unit, works in the secure psychiatric unit every single day, interacting with patients and incarcerated persons on a daily basis. And so those 3 made sense with regard to their transition to Group 2, because they're currently Group 1. On page 10, I was working to try to streamline legislative language. It didn't quite come over the way I had proposed it, so you'll see in the middle, we literally have a number of directors and wardens, and I was just trying to make it state directors and wardens, and it's literally a grammatical cleanup. On the bottom of page 10, numbered 15, that is language supported through the discussions with employee relations, just to make sure that there's equitable transfer of negotiated benefits for all rank and file within the agency. Moving on to page 11, we start going into the work and advocacy. The New Hampshire State Prison for Men is a aged, dilapidated infrastructure, and the Department of Corrections is advocating that we begin the process to move forward to rebuild that institution and abandon the current site. The oldest area is 1878. I provided a separate slide deck for you to look at your leisure that gives you a compare and contrast. We moved into the New Hampshire Correctional Facility for Women in April of 2018. I had the pleasure of hosting the Governor and Executive Council and taking them on a tour of that facility last week, and really setting their eyes on the difference between a facility designed for the employee as well as the efficient operation as well as rehabilitation. And I think you'll find just from a glance at those pictures, and certainly offer to any member of the legislature an opportunity to tour the men's prison and tour the women's prison to see, and you can ask yourself 2 questions. Where would you want to work and where would you want to rehabilitate? And I think those pictures really say it all. And it also tells you that the staff who work day in and day out at the New Hampshire State Prison for Men do it with the courage and dedication we ask of them in a complex, aged infrastructure. And I have appreciated the House's support in leaving in the $10 million, and certainly look to the Senate to even consider any portion of the $40 million that was taken out, but respect all that was offered to us and what the House passed over to you, and would hope that that continues as we try to get ready for something this state needs to be prepared for. So that is most of the conversation on page 11. Number 52 speaks to our IT funding that did not fit within the 3% the governor had asked, but it is included here. So again, we can continue to work on that IT efficiency in the organization across all sites. Number 168, we went through a period of time where part-time corrections officers were not being paid equitably to full-time corrections officers. And this does that at the bottom. Any rank and file within those ranks would be paid the same as their full-time peers. So that was another employee relations ask. On page 12, these were asks that I again thank the House for supporting. This agency needs resources, and we need nimble resources to both recognize our employees as well as recruit and retain our employees. So the language included in here is to do something very specific, to say 1 week a year, National Corrections Employee Week, which is always the first full week of May. Every year, the first full week of May. So if you see a corrections employee, please thank them for their service. Thank them when you see them, but especially that first full week of May. That would afford us the opportunity to really celebrate those that work on behalf of the state in 24-hour facilities with individuals sentenced to felonies in these different environments. And again, that's the intent, is to be more nimble and more have more flexibility, but within limitations, to appreciate our employees during a time in which they need that appreciation. On the bottom of that page begins an experience I had as commissioner that I hope never to experience, with the passing of Officer Prather. That if an individual in the closing of their estate, that money gets pretty well locked up. And there's no nimble way to help support very young adults who were 19 and 17 and trying to intern their father. And we did our best as citizens and individuals in seeking solicitations, but this borrows language and says that the commissioner shall have the authority and may pay for the internment of somebody who works for the department, who dies in the line of duty, so that's not a question. So it is a safety net that I hope that any commissioner within this agency never has to use, but one in which I really appreciate the House's support in having it there in case I need to. Page 13 is the language that didn't make it over around the $40 million. Again, just wanted to put it out to the Senate Finance so you had it before you. And then page 14, I worked through most of the lines I just discussed, showing you the 2022 actual, the adjusted authorized for 2023, the difference, what was passed by the House, the difference between the 2024 and 2025 in the major class lines moving forward. And those should line up to the discussion I've had with you. If I could, in the attachment one slide I want to call your attention to, which is the power of the footnote associated with the reallocation funding that the House passed over in the budget, where we are going through the personnel rule process of all of our security rank and file, and going through that process to ascertain where they would be moved in the normal classification process of state employees. Page 12 shows you why we started that process. Corrections officer trainees are the lowest paid state law enforcement rank and file next to corrections officers. And the Department of Corrections owns the responsibility that it should have been staying astride of job descriptions for decades. So we're working to rectify that both now and with our ask to you, the Senate, to continue to have our footnote to fund the reallocation outcome. I'm hoping to have a forecasted number to respond back to the fiscal note request, because we're much closer now. But it is to get our staff equitably paid for the jobs that they're doing within the state classification process. And it shows you why it's difficult to recruit someone to work as a corrections officer to meet the same standards as state police, community police, when the pay is drastically different. So I just wanted to call that page to your attention. With that, I will pause and avail myself to any questions you may have.
Questions from the committee members? Senator Bradley.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. How are you?
Good, how are you, sir?
So I have several questions. You met with Senator Ricciardi recently and discussed some sort of a structure, I believe, for training with her.
Yes, thank you for that question, Senator Bradley. We've made a gopher request for a recruitment and retention center. Currently right now, and I wish I had a picture to show you of our training shed trailer. I'm not sure what you would call it other than soon to be condemned, but it is the location that we use that comfortably holds 20 people. We need to replace it. And ultimately, when we're trying to invest and say we're a professional organization, that training trailer shed is not professional. And we don't have the same physical plant as Police Standards and Training or the Fire Academy or you name it. It's not like that. And the ask of the gopher was to fund leasing a facility so we would have a central point to recruit, but also to do our ongoing annual training, not our Corrections Academy, but our ongoing annual training. With all of the LEAC recommendations and everything else in the corrections realm, we don't really have a suitable location to train the diversified number of professionals in the organization. We have a lot of partners whom I will appreciate, and especially this Friday, the National Guard is letting us use one of their classrooms, but we're really borrowing a lot to try to get our training delivered. And that was the ask that Senator Ricciardi and I discussed.
So, is that something that we'd be throwing good money after bad if we funded while doing the engineering for a new prison or not?
No, the lease expense was, I think, $1 million, but I think it's gone, no, it's not even, it's gone down since we made the ask, Senator Bradley, and I'm happy to share that. But if that was approved, 2024 and 25, as it's proposed here, actually has the money to maintain that leased building.
Okay. So my second question, speaking about the new prison, I've heard some talk that the engineering, $10 million is not enough.
That's a great question. I'll have Director Hansen.
Yeah, good afternoon. So the engineering cost, the architectural engineering work on that facility of that size, assuming that it's going to hold about 2,000 inmates, rough numbers, $300 to $500 million, depending on site, depending on location. It's going to be approaching $50 million. The complete engineering package will approach that. The $10 million will do a lot of the programming work, and we need a tremendous amount of site evaluation to determine exactly where it would fit behind the women's prison. As you know, that's large granite outcropping up there, but if we do what we did at Women's, which is a win-win, we were able to crush all the rock and then repurpose it back in, did zero trucking, it would work out really well. But it is anywhere between 7 and 10% of the gross costs of a prison, according to the national statistics.
But for purposes of this budget and this appropriation, is the 10 million enough to get started?
Oh, absolutely, yes. We've vetted that through Public Works, and they agree.
Okay. You referenced a footnote. Obviously, I think we're all concerned about your vacancy rate. So if we extend the footnote, that'll help. But I guess my question is, with the proposed 10 and 2% pay raise, is that going to address some of the recruit and retention issues for corrections officers?
Senator Bradley, it's a fair question. The 10% across all employees of the state, that slide on page 12 means it goes up 10% across it. So the chart stays the same at 10% higher. The reallocation I've been working on with the Division of Personnel, that's the game changer that shifts the wages to be commensurate to the state classification system. So yes, it helps, but the agency has to finish what it started with the reallocation.
You still need the footnote, obviously.
Yes,
but
sir.
For purposes of, this budget and filling at least some of the vacant positions, it helps.
Absolutely. The work that the DAS did with the private firm to examine state employee wages to private sector wages really helped guide that conversation.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Rosenbaum.
Thank you. Just as we've been doing with the replacement facility for the Sununu Center using ARPA funds, is there a possibility to use ARPA funds for this design and engineering work on the new men's prison?
Senator Roosevelt, I think that's a fair question. Don't have an answer to that question. I will comment that when the ARPA funds started, I actually advised and recommended that we consider using those as a construction base. The state of Alabama did that and faced significant criticism for doing it. So I think it's a fair question, but I'm not, I'll have to refer back to Gopher on that if it meets the federal criteria.
That would be good. I'm wondering who they got criticism from.
I will send you that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, that was.
Thank you.
Actually send it through Deb and then Deb will get it.
Absolutely will, so the whole committee gets it.
Appreciate that. Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Oh, Senator D'Alessandro has a.
Thank you. Excuse me. Forgive me for my tardiness, Mr. Chairman. I should have been quicker.
You?
Yeah, well, I'm working at it.
You're forgiven? Go ahead.
Thank you. Forgiveness is part and parcel of the game.
Rehabilitation,
Question
sir.
is, with regard to education, with the reintroduction of the Pell Grant and other opportunities that are being made available, what do you think, or what effect will that have on your population, and who will come in and teach the courses?
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. We currently, White Mountain Community College is one of our partners, and they are already working within our current infrastructure to offer those courses. And NHTI is the other partner, and they are on the cusp of being that active participant too. We had to apply in advance, and we were selected, and those were our partners that were selected with us. And then so I can tell you that's exactly who it is. And the expectation is that the research will stand true, that offering education and vocation will reduce recidivism, and we'll see that go down.
Okay. Further question?
Absolutely.
The program that Derek Lucci has at the prison, I saw the Chronicle presentation of that. It seems to have a positive effect. Is there any thought about continuing that or asking for funding to take care of that?
Senator D'Alessandro, we appreciate partners like Mr. Lucci and others. He has funding right now to actually study the effectiveness of it, and in the absence of having data that shores up and says that it's making an impact, I think it's a little premature, but we'll continue to collaborate and partner with him.
Okay. And last question. Have you ever seen the 1973 study of what we should do with prison reform? It's in the library. I was part of that study in 1973 where we talked about relocating the men's prison. So it's interesting. Not only the men's prison, but it talked about the women's prison and it talked about halfway houses. It was a study we paid a lot of money for.
Right.
And never used. Obviously, we never used it. But it may be worth looking at in terms of what the thought process was for a men's facility and so forth. And we have the women's facility, and the upgrade obviously is significant. It's important because 99% of them are getting out.
Right.
And having them better prepared and it makes a big difference. Just wonder if you might take a look at that.
I absolutely will, and I've examined the master plans that were done by Crabtree and others, so I'll make sure I apprise myself of that document.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, seeing no additional questions, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
And it's almost Miller time, as they say. Okay, I think we've all got the presentation. We're ready when you are. I think you turned the mic off instead of on.
Did I? Okay, sorry about that.
Much better.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, I'm Joseph Malika, Chairman of the New Hampshire Liquor Commission, and with me is Tina Demers, our CFO. Presentation we have in front of you. Let's start off on page 2, which is just a quick introduction that the Liquor Commission is self-funded. We're in a separate liquor fund outside of the general fund, and no general fund appropriations are used to maintain our operations. And we run under RSA 176.3, which is what guides the Liquor Commission in its work every day. And I'll turn it over to Tina to bring you through.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Tina Demers, CFO for the Liquor Commission. On page 3, you have the revenue projections that support the budget that we're requesting. The table shows you sales, gross profit, and other revenue minus expenses for our net revenue on line 6. Then there's the 5% transfer to the alcohol fund that comes to the revenue plan on line 8. For FY 22 and 23, there is the additional funds transferred to the Granted Advantage for the final transfer to the general fund, which is on line 10. The governor and the House estimates are close, with the House at 135.9 in FY 24 and 135.6 in FY 25. Our total expenses include the HB2 estimates for the 10% and the 2% pay raise to show the impact on the bottom line net revenue. On page 4 is a list of our major expense categories that correspond to the table and line numbers identified on page 5. I won't go through all the categories, but there are a couple that we think are important to highlight. The first is the total salaries and benefits. They're decreasing in FY 24, even though we've requested 28 new positions because of the reduction in overtime and part-time budget requests and changes in positions as a result of turnover. FY 25 increases are a result of salary step and benefit increases. And at the bottom of, God bless you. At the bottom of the table, you'll see the amount added in HB2 for the salary and compensation adjustment at the 10% and 2%, which is $3.4 million and $4.1 million in 24 and 25. Number 6, technology is increasing, originally for an additional prioritized needs request for subscription and existing support and maintenance contracts to support the next-gen D365 software platform. This is replacing the current point of sale and back office financial system. Now, with our go live date extended, the funding requested in FY24 is to support contracts extensions for the implementation of the new system. Number 7, DOIT increase for additional prioritized needs is also to support the next-gen system. The governor's budget only included $500,000 each year of the $1 million request for Azure hosting services and an increase in shared services. The House did fund the total request, which includes 2 new positions, handheld devices, and cloud services, all of which are important to support the new D365 software platform. The increases related to the new system are significant because we are running the same core system for the last 40 years, supported by in-house staff. Moving into current technology requires significant license and cloud storage costs versus the current backup and server storages that we use today. And then you'll see that there are a few categories that are underfunded in FY23 based on our FY22 spend, causing a greater percent of increase in FY24. This is a result of cost increases and shift in business needs, such as current expense, utilities, contracts, equipment, and debt. So on page 6 is just a list of those additional prioritized needs that I mentioned, and the items in green are the ones that were approved in the governor's budget, but all items are included in the House budget. On page 7, on page 7 and 8 shows the annual breakdown by category type, with the breakdown consistent for both years. As you can see, salaries and benefits is 53% of our expenses when you include the proposed pay raise. FY24 total budget is $8.9 million, or 10.7% more than the FY23 adjusted authorized budget. The main factors are the $3.4 million for the 10% pay raise and the $3.3 million increase for the additional prioritized needs for the D365 system. Salaries and benefits and travel are decreasing, while other categories are increasing due to the cost of inflation and projected needs such as utilities, equipment, debt, rent, and contracts. And then on page 8 for FY25, total budget is increasing $3.7 million, or 4% over FY24 total budget. That's for salary step increases and benefits for the cost of inflation and projected needs, as the same as FY24. Thank you. On page 9 is our organizational structure, and this is to show you the new positions that we're requesting in the budget. We have 2 in audit and inventory control, an accountant and an internal auditor, which is based on a recommendation from a prior LBA audit. The other positions are under marketing and merchandising, 2 in marketing for an additional beverage marketing specialist, and a program assistant for data research and analysis. And then there are 24 new retail store clerks for various retail outlet locations to meet the needs of customers, processing transactions, and managing inventory. So on page 10, this is a history of positions. The first chart is our authorized full-time positions, showing the number of filled and vacant positions and the vacancy rate. And as you can see, this year is our highest vacancy rate at almost 12%. We are currently recruiting for 40 positions, with the majority in the stores. The second chart is the full-time equivalent, the FTE, based on part-time hours worked. And as you can see, we're down to 285 full-time equivalent. So for comparisons, in 21, when we had a record sales year, we had 312 full-time filled positions and 358 part-time full-time equivalent, for a total of 670 full-time equivalent. Currently, we have 303 filled full-time positions and 285 part-time full-time equivalent, for a total of 588, and that's a difference of 82 full-time equivalent. This reduction in positions has impacted sales and is the reason why store hours have been reduced and stores were closed and/or consolidated. So historically, the outlets have been supported by a fairly even mix of full-time and part-time staff. However, with the current trend of part-time working less hours, we've found that we need to request additional full-time positions for the 24-25 budget to offset the decline in the part-time hours. Okay. So page 11 through 15 are just summaries by division as listed in the Governor's versus the House Compare report, with page number references. There's a pie chart showing the breakdown by the class category and an explanation for changes. First is the Office of the Commission, overseeing all operations of the Commission with the primary goal to increase sales and maximize profits while operating in a cost-effective and efficient manner. The one item to note is the increase in FY24 of $303,000, and this is to add a consultant line to support DOIT with the NextGen system for individuals with specific skill sets. FY25 increase is for salary, step, and benefits, and increased costs to support the headquarters. So on page 12, you have the Division of Enforcement, which includes enforcement, licensing, education, and grants. The division is responsible for enforcing alcoholic beverage laws, enforcing youth access to liquor and tobacco, and providing licensing, education, and support for over 6,100 licensees. In FY22, the division collected over $19 million in revenue. FY24 budget is decreasing 6.9% due to changes in positions as a result of turnover and increases in FY25 for full-time funding of salary, benefits, and steps. In red, you'll see that we would like to request adding $20,000 to the org 1728, which is the drug task force. It's on page 407 of the Compare report. And this is for a one-time, one-year increase. We recently received information from DOJ or the Attorney General's office, that they are in the process of securing additional federal funds for all existing DTF officers and investigators. So we were looking to increase that budget line by $20,000. So on page 13, you have the Division of Administration, which includes DOIT, HR, and Finance. This includes auditing, inventory control, and legal, and all support the departments within the commission. FY24 increase is 19.5% or $1.7 million, and this is primarily from the additional prioritized needs for DOIT, along with adding an allocation for indirect costs and the 2 new positions. And FY25 is increasing for the salaries and step benefits. So on page 15 is workers' comp and unemployment comp. Workers' comp for FY23 is underfunded, and the increase in FY24 is based on the historical trend. The increase is because as we continue to be understaffed and ask more of our employees, we are seeing higher claim rates. On page 16 and 17 is HB2 language that we requested in the Governor and the House phase that was approved for the Liquor Commission to have the authority to transfer funds for our employee incentive program from the Liquor Commission fund to such accounts as required to compensate qualified employees as provided in our Liquor 800 rules. And this will allow us to pay the incentive out of any additional profits from the increase in sales. And then on page 18 is a new request for a language change. This is for consistency and clarification on the calculation of the transfer to the Alcohol Abuse and Prevention Fund. The request is to change the language in 17616 from saying the previous fiscal year to the most recently issued. It should be the annual comprehensive financial report to match the language that is currently in 176A. And this will resolve our recent LBA finding in our most recent financial audit.
And we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions from the committee members? Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, and thank you for this language change. I saw when I was reading the fiscal binder for Friday that you've closed a store somewhere. The people who've been working there, are you planning to absorb them and you're still asking for 24 new outlet positions? Or would those people who aren't working at a closed store anymore be able to take the place of the 24 new positions?
No, that store was closed a while back for a number of reasons, and the full-time and part-time positions were transferred to the Keene store, the West Chesterfield store, and other stores in that area.
Thank you. So you still need 24?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Bradley.
Thank you. Can you sort of describe what the employee incentive program, how it would work for an employee?
Certainly. The employee incentive program was a program that I had put together in 2011 with Governor Lynch. We put it into House Bill 2 at that point. There was no funding in it at that particular time. We went back, and with the issue that not only our industry, but the retail industry nationwide, we thought it would be a good time to implement it. So the way that it works is if there's 7 areas in the state. We have 7 supervisors that oversee 7 different areas in the state. Each area will be looked at individually, and if there's an increase in that area above 5%,
0.5% to 5%.
Okay, 0.5% to 5%, then the employees will share in a 10% share of the increase of those sales. And
all of the employees in that area?
All of the employees in that area. So it does create a little friendly competition between employees and areas to, we're trying to basket build. We're trying to get the employees to the floors to help customers basket build and buy more products while they're there. And this is a program that we know is proven, not here at the Liquor Commission, but is proven in industry that it works and will incentivize employees to take that time with the consumers when they're there in the stores.
And the unions are embracing it?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Senator.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
For the committee, we've got a meeting tomorrow. We have scheduled an executive session. Hopefully, we'll take care of a few bills, but I also want to start identifying sections in the budget or individual department budgets which no one has any problems with, so that we can check them off the list and make the list smaller, so that when we get down to the trading dollar for dollar or 10 for 20 or whatever, that list is smaller. Doesn't mean that if we put it on that list that it can't come back off for some reason, but again, we're trying to get that list smaller. So please think about it. There'll be a Republican caucus after this to start talking about some of that. And hopefully the Democrats will do the same thing in preparation. So thank you very much. Our business of the day being complete, we are adjourned.